Welcome everyone, I'm Christoph and I'm thrilled to welcome you to another episode of our Amplify the Brand series, the ultimate live in building your powerful brands in the digital age. Along with my friend and fellow colleague on the screen there, Samoa, is a branding expert, and we're here to help you take your brand to the next level. So whether you're an entrepreneur, small business owner, a marketing professional, or someone looking at personal branding, this is packed with practical insights and strategies that will help you amplify your brand and stand out in that digital landscape. So please get ready, take some notes, take what we talk about today, put it into action, because by the end of the live stream, we'll have a roadmap for building a brand that truly resonates with your target audience. So thank you for joining us today, and let's find another way to amplify your brand. And we're talking about a topic that is interesting in the sense that it's exploring debranding, and we're talking about why major brands are stripping down to redefine their identity, Sim. And this is something that's a global thing. It's not something that's just happening in segments or markets that we don't know about. It's something that you see in everyday life. So, and we're going to explore why this is happening and what that impact has on the industries that we're going to talk through. So, but you tell me your little insight into this.
That's about it. And when we jump, before we jump into the first slide, we just want to let everybody know that what we're about to talk today belongs right in the, there we go. Yes, here we go.
Right.
Got it. The topic of today is like a comparison to me, and that's why I put that slide there. Because we can easily compare the principles that guide the process of debranding and the general globalized trend that most brands are taking as an approach to being relevant still today, and compare it to a very archaic or very old set of principles demonstrated by Zen. The Zen philosophy, the first principle of that philosophy is oneness, recognizing the unity of existence, which in parallel to today, brands are given the chance to be present in just more than the local stage. So they need to be unified in their existence, and many times even globally. The second principle is mindfulness, which basically tells us to focus on the present moment. And debranding is actually the process of focusing on the important elements of the brand, which leads to the third principle of simplicity, which is also a principle that I love using for logo design, and specifically in the process of debranding, where we are encouraged to find the beauty in the minimalism and making everything clearer. So with that introduction, let's jump in, Chris.
Yeah. And before we do, just to remind everyone, everything we talk about is part of our Branding On framework, the P8 program that we have in place. And we talk through each one of these specifically each week to one of the topics. And this one fits right into persona to help you understand that it is part of your personality in your brand when you're taking on this approach, or depersonality. So let's go through well-known brands that have done this either successfully or have applied this debranding approach. So talk me through these ones.
Well, I just wanted to visually depict the examples that where we started talking about how debranding is a non-gender specific trend. It has come across the land truly, into tech, into automobile, into entertainment, into finance, into hosting. And the examples that we have here, like Airbnb and Lotus and Dropbox and Kia, Pringles, they all show very, very clearly a tendency, an intention to professionalize and retain a main essence of the brand. And when we look at these examples here, they're all basically simpler versions of what they have once been. And especially with this second slide here, we even see how this was not a clear path to most brands. Even the more established brands and the more recognizable brands in the world, namely the Warner Brothers. The Warner Brothers pictures had a little misstep, which wasn't necessarily a misstep, but was a learning in the process of debranding. So technology was the reason why they wanted to look so advanced for the age they launched their business and their company. And as you can see by their initial logo, they had effects of depth, 3D-ness to it that later on were severely simplified into that streamlined shield approach. But then it happened that the data they received indicated a bit of a backlash, and the 11% of retention of their audience likeness to their logo forced them to take an adaptation back to a mid step between the old and the new. So just to let everybody know that the context of today's conversation can be a learning process for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. A number of these brands, it's as you touched on with technology, it's because of technology that we were able to create some of these funky graphics, and that's caused some of these logos to do things that are a bit questionable. And just even with what you've got on the screen there, some of these you can date. You can automatically know that they've come from a period.
Absolutely.
Because of things that they've done and things that they're doing. So, and just with the St. Lawrence and the Burberry and things, those logos are now being referred to as the little black dress logos. Because if you're in fashion, it's a default now to have a black logo. And that's why they're now calling it the little black logo. So, yes. So talk us through the screen, because this is a pretty famous one. Because people think Apple just started off with this amazing design, and it really wasn't that.
Not at all. Not at all. This is going to lead into the big question around debranding. As you can see there, the first logo. My tendency is to say illustration because I'm looking at it. The first logo that Apple had was much more of an illustration than a logo per se. We have become used to be exposed to the current Apple logo, and that has maintained its structure for dozens of years by now, with minimal variations. It is the stylized Apple in a profile, but if we look at what the logo began being back in the day and where it is today, especially on the platform where it's being displayed, aka the mobile, we can see very, very clearly that it presents many challenges for recognition. It presents many challenges in terms of identification and memorability. Everybody remembers the Apple logo today, not the first instance of that logo. With that, let's jump into the big question around debranding.
Yeah, why?
Which is why.
So,
and we've just spent... Go.
No, I was going to say, it's a mobile-first approach, which is digital adaptation, scalability, flexibility, which leads to memorability. And these are things, especially scalability and flexibility, these are things you always have to explain to our clients when we're trying to develop their logo, that this is important. And it's not till they start thinking about social media that all of a sudden it becomes really important, because they've now got to put it in a little square box or on a mobile app or whatever the case be. So, yeah.
Absolutely. It's as simple as that. The 16 by 16 pixel is the new standard for the minimum required amount of identification of any logo today. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, that's the measurements of the screen profile picture in most social media platforms. Any profile picture these days will have between 16 and 32 pixels wide, which is less than the size of your nail, your thumbnail, literally. So this is one of the main requirements that actually forced mobile-first approach, and the first reason why debranding is such a thing.
Yeah, and look, there's two definitions really of debranding that I think we need to touch on here. One is debranding is removing the name of the brand. And then there's what we're talking about today, which is the sort of step before you remove your name, which is you've taken a complex logo and turned it into something that's in its purest form as it can be, and simplifying it. So you talked about globalization, optimizing for platforms, for boundaries, present well across platforms and physical boundaries. So we've touched on that. Then we've talked about the modern aesthetics, where we shift towards minimalism. Modern aesthetics is prevalent in the design trends, influencing companies to follow suit. Now, I always do this with you. Like, I always talk about how do we simplify, get to the core of what we're trying to do. Because, like I touched on with technology, as technology got cooler with how it could do creative, like it wasn't requiring you to be, and even right now, like anyone who's on Instagram can pick a filter and make themselves look a certain way.
Yeah.
And that's technology doing what technology does. But rather than you being your true form or having to get a makeup artist to do a whole bunch of work on you before you got in front of the camera, you can now just click a filter and it does it. So this is sort of what happened with technology and logos, is they got used to these cool things and they started adding them in to allow the technology to do it. So as it's touched on here, it's brand evolution. So companies undergo strategic changes or branding efforts to reflect an evolved brand identity, shredding the complexity for a more refined image. Hence why I was talking about the little black dress logos
Black
earlier.
dress.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
So let's get into what risks come with debranding. Do you want to talk about before we get into it? Or?
Yes, well, the trend is here. And you want to know why? We've covered the reasons why. Technology created the first beast, it forced into its second iteration. And now we're at the stage where we're left with a simplified logo. That's all nice and good. But what are the deeper meanings of debranding? What does that do actually to your business? And how does that business maintain its presence when it has debranded? The logo was just the introduction point, but we're now going to delve deeper into the other parts of that brand. And coming up right on number one is the loss of brand identity. Simplifying a logo might lead to this loss of distinctive brand identity, especially when the new design becomes generic or undistinguishable from competitors.
Yeah. Like, this is again where, especially the little black dress versions I was talking about earlier, is if all the logos, now we when we develop logos, we actually create a black and a white logo because we know there is a need for it. It's not like this isn't something you don't do. But when you make it the brand and black is your default, it's like all of a sudden you have no personality, you have no other thing that you can build on. You've lost all those little intrinsic things that bring out the personality. So they have to go deeper. Now, if you're a big brand, you're well known, and that's probably the one thing I need to highlight here is most brands that do debranding to the extremes is because they're a leader in that industry, that segment, or that market, and they can get away with it because they've invested the money into brand awareness over not just one campaign, but decades of building up that understanding of what the brand is about. So if you're a new brand, there is no debranding because you're branding.
Correct. That's right.
Yeah. So, be mindful of what we're talking about here is you've probably had an existing brand for a little while and you're thinking about how do we simplify it and how do we not lose our brand identity while we go through the process, which is what we're talking about here.
Absolutely.
So I'll talk about the second point here, which is confusion, negative perception means a consumer. So a sudden change can confuse existing customers who are familiar with your previous brand or might see it as a backward step to a lack of innovation. They may not easily associate the new design with an established brand, hence what I said before. So if you're a well-established brand and you love them for what they do and how they go about it, and then you remove color or certain looks, all of a sudden we have a problem.
We might take it as a negative connotation, might interpret it as a lack of ability to keep up with the times. And what Chris mentioned right before is absolutely correct in the sense that brands that have built the identification, have built brand awareness, and so much equity through years and years of magnificent budgets, they can easily, or not easily, but much more easily pivot into a summarized version of the brand. And by debranding, they're removing the elements that stranded them into a specific expectation by the customer audience that then over time shifted and still was able to keep this identification with the consumer. However, this is bound by one factor that we want to talk about right now. That is timing. Chris said, if you are branding, don't even worry about debranding because you're probably not there. Being a small business, not having a huge budget at your mercy to use, and not being a global player, it's very likely that you're going to spend some time building the brand before you start chipping away at the things that made it recognizable and retain the ones that keep the essence over time. But time is the one factor that can make the huge difference.
Exactly, yeah. But also mediums that your logo is going to be seen in as well will decide what this sort of look and feel is going to be. So you've got to take the fact that that's on board. We'll probably get into that a little bit later with some of the other things we're going to bring up. But, something to take on board. If you do take your brand and minimalize it, then you've got to really think about the impact it's going to have on who already love your logo and your brand as it is. So, yeah.
Which is exactly what you just said. There you go, ineffective communication.
So if the reasons behind the debranding are not communicated effectively, consumers may misunderstand the motivations, leading to speculation and skepticism. And I guess we've talked about this in a number of episodes in the past about consistency. So if you make a change is perceived as new and different.
Mm-hmm.
And we've said that new and different is a good strategy to attract a new audience or build on an audience. But, if you go about it the wrong way, as some of these brands that have taken away their essence, I guess, is the DNA that made them what they were, by going too simple with their debranding process, they lost some of that essence, that personality, that unknown vibe that attracted you to them in the first place. And that's something you've got to just be mindful of when you go through this process, because it can actually be ineffective in communicating what you're trying to achieve. Number 4 is missed marketing opportunities. Yeah, the previous brand elements might have a valuable asset for marketing and storytelling, but debranding could lead to missed opportunities to leverage these elements in campaigns. So talk me through this, Sim. What's this really mean?
Previous brand elements might have been valuable for marketing and storytelling. Having those removed missed the opportunity in communication. So when you simply change and don't even address the elephant in the room with your audience, it becomes a bit of a either it's a negative connotation by way of trying to sneak in something that wasn't fully announced, wasn't properly introduced, and has no justification for being. So this leaves with a potential of ostracizing the people who have supported you to the point where you are as a brand. Whether that be a business brand, that be a personal brand. If you just change and show up at your local church, at your local club, at your local friends gathering in a completely radical outlook, presence, and your hairstyle is completely different, in fact, contrary to what you've always portrayed yourself as standing for, people are going to question. And if you say nothing, that's even worse. If you're saying you're on the way to a masquerade ball, okay, that's a funny approach. If you're saying that you've had an experience that changed your outlook on life, people will maybe crack a joke or two, but they will understand that you've gone through something. And this something is the communication. This is the opportunity to keep your marketing close to your audience and make it still relevant.
Yeah, and I think some brands that have gone through this process have done this quite well. Burger King is probably one good example, right? Their original logo probably didn't have a lot to do with burgers, but when they did the new version with the burger buns and then their name in the middle, and the way they simplified it, it actually went back to one of their original logos, but even that logo was dated. So they used debranding as a good way to go back to a logo that was effective, and recognizable and instantly said what they did, rather than the funky 80s and 90s version of a circle and the Burger
A
King
circle with the blue swirl on the side.
Yeah, which was just, again, that's what I'm saying. Some of these processes you actually get dated quite easily because you can go, that was a period when that's what was being done to those logos. So
That's right.
missed opportunity is kind of layered in the way that you can actually use it to create a new direction for your business, for reminding people of what you do. Like, these are the kind of things we're talking about when you do it. So don't just go about doing it without having a story behind it. Oh, here's an interesting one, the legal beavers, legal issues. So simplifying bare minimums may reduce the design to so much that it bears too much similarity to an existing trademark, and that could result in some legal challenges. Yes, well, I can see some reasons where this would happen. And
when we simplify, especially logos that tend to be geometric shapes because we understand them better and we can very quickly identify them. When we reduce these geometric shapes to the bare basics, we become again what the other stranding elements made them not be during that entire time. Said in a better, not as confusing way, when you simplify your presence, and especially the logo, this is where the most of the legal issues in branding have become a sort of frequent occurrence, not so much with visual identities. It's much more on the logo side, because brands invest millions into making their trademarks legal all across the planet. And when somebody steps on their territory and takes away some of their lunch because they look like themselves and they potentially can grab some of their market share, that's when legal becomes an issue. So bringing it back to the pure geometry of it, if you simplify a logo to a bare triangle, a bare square, and you make it no different than the next square, you might run into some problems. And this happens also at the level of colors. We've just had the conversation earlier today with a client. We can't just simply adopt the direct competitor's color because there is a trademark on that color. We probably, maybe some of us, not all of us, but some of us might know about the big court cases around the purple that Cadbury wanted to trademark and register under their name and not let anybody else use it. So this is where things happen on the legal plane.
That's right. Yeah. So look, we'll move on because we're not legal people, but we know that there's some issues with that. So now here's a really important reason why you have some risks around this. This is cost and investment. So the process to do branding and introducing a logo can incur substantial costs for your design, implementation, to whether it's marketing or the rebranding of all the materials that you've just invested. As I said, sometimes it's years or decades into building that asset into something that it is now, and then you just strip it all away, which means depending on what industry you're in, this is going to affect all touch points within the industry that you have built up that brand, like, and what it looks like and what it feels like. And by, I guess, again, if you've used certain assets in a certain way, by removing them, yes, as I said, you're kind of like taking a limb off. You're kind of like ripping an arm off or a leg or whatever the case be, or you're whacking on some new makeup. It's sort of just, it's going to be a dramatic change. So you're going to have to look at what this does to everything that you're doing, whatever industry you're in. It's going to have an impact. So
Correct.
Cost and investment, yes. Now let's look at the positives of this. So it does present opportunities. It's not all bad doom and gloom going down that pathway. So want to get into it, or do you want to talk about what that means?
Yeah, well, especially for small businesses, this is going to be the interesting section of today's live, because we've established the guidelines, and we're not trying to say don't go out of them. We're just saying that the guidelines are there for a reason. And so far, we wanted to present to you the disclaimer of the entire conversation. Now, let's jump into where it gets really juicy and good for everybody attending, because the opportunities brought in by Debranding are actually a lot more than the previous opportunities that older style brands had. Let's go.
Yeah. So one of them is an infusion of personality, which is sort of what we're saying. You may lose your personality, but you may actually be able to infuse something in explaining the rationale behind that new presence. Your audience has a fantastic opportunity to create a deepen bond and introduce elements that were missed in the space, which were visible. This communication is required to build the trust built by showing care for the new stage of the brand's existence and reinforcing its core values, which is what we touched on in some of the negative aspects of this. Is that
Absolutely.
you don't get this right, then your logo just comes out of nowhere. And this is the same when we talk about branding in general. But if you're going to debrand and you're going to remove things, then have a story behind it and look at how you can make that something that's personable or a personality trait that is a positive outtake for the community or your consumer or your people to take on board.
Perfect insight right there. Everything that is an opportunity stems directly from the challenges, the risks that debranding brings. Very well noted there by Chris. And let's jump into number 2 then.
Yeah, which is versatility. So by being simpler, visual identities tend to be more versatile across the different platforms, medias, and sizes. So this versatility is valuable for small businesses with limited resources for their marketing and design. There are less limitations, constraints, and opening up the potential for creative uses and bigger depth in their marketing opportunities. So a new brand starting today or in the last couple of years with social media in mind already, they're ahead of some of these brands that had to adapt. And those logos that we showed earlier are fantastic examples of this, where they've been around for sometimes 100 years. All right. So 100 years ago, this technology didn't exist. Their logo probably worked for that mediums that were around at that time, and they have to adapt. You can just jump on in and off you go.
Now you're given all this playground, this space to introduce much more personality that were technically not possible up until 10 years ago with the advent of internet. And then with the current usage of mobile platforms, that just means we're not actually stranded to the very things that made our brand a little bit stiff in certain points. From a design perspective, on my end, because I am the visual guy, the design guy, this means that patterns are much more usable in backgrounds of websites, movies, packagings, and whereas previously you would need to have one version specifically for one package, one version specifically for a let's say a case of the product. You would need to have another specific version for a t-shirt, whereas today scalability has been introduced. You'll notice that the reactivity of websites when you tilt your phone on its side and when you hold it up, it just automatically adapts on the spot. This is incredible because it doesn't strand you to the limitations, technically speaking, that you used to have only 10 years ago. HTML became much more, getting a bit technical here, HTML became a much more less clunky of a language for web design programming. So everything that is opened up in the field by being more scalable, more flexible, and more versatile allows us to explore everything with a unified Canva in the background of everything that we do.
That's right. Yeah. So moving on to that could lead to number 3, which is cost effectiveness. So debranding can potentially reduce your design and marketing costs. So it could be a simple logo that could be easier and less expensive to reproduce across all the various materials and promotional items. So again, what I was touching on earlier, if you have this end game in mind and you are aware of what mediums that you're going to use your logo in, then having that in that design process, and we love working with clients on this and knowing this about their businesses, we can actually help them reduce their costs, because we can say, well, don't do it that way, because every time you have to reproduce the logo, it's going to have to use this technology or this paintwork or this element, and now it's going to be more expensive. So you can actually, by debranding, make things simpler. And so it's just use purple, just use yellow, just use the one color, because that's going to really work well for you. So,
or
yeah,
even strategize to have the potential to optimize for that one color option. Because what Chris said, everybody's got a black dress. The black dress applies specifically to logo design and visual identity. Is that if your logo is dependent on color to be correctly interpreted, that's a problem. And it doesn't optimize for today's day and technology.
that's right. So, moving along to trend adaptation. So, a minimalist or debranding approach allows your business to adapt more easily to design trends without competing overhaul of the visual identity. In fact, including the breadth of and their base presence. So I guess what I was touching on here is that some of those earlier designs we talked about, a lot of them we can tell when they were created. You can specifically go, that's a 90s brand, that's noughties, that's something that was done in the 80s. That's the 70s, 60s, 50s, all the way back to, each. It actually can be decade related. So what we're sort of saying at the moment is this debranding approach is something that will, yes, I can see in the future might date you, but it won't date you in a hurry, because this is something that all the brands have to come back to. At some point, this debranding version of your logo is the simplistic as it can get version of your logo, which means it's the foundation. It's like the base that you build everything else upon.
And not only that, with the trends that there are nowadays, trends and genres, because that's also something to consider. If your brand has one value that can touch on the values of a current in the moment trend, it is able to pivot and bring it in, adapting it, not losing its personality. And by having that debranded look, it can still fit in. It makes sense to be seen with your social media posts, for example. If you want to run a campaign on social media that is based on a very specific kind of hipster approach or punk approach, and your brand is not stuck to the 80s, it can very likely accommodate for some of the traits that intertwine well with your current brand. That's the marvelous thing about flattening logos and making them optimized for mobile. It just provides, on a first instance, less detail, but that's okay, because this less detail will be able to scale and incorporate other elements, which is incredibly powerful in today's panorama of social media and digital space.
And what we're talking about here is anyone in the last 5 years that created a vignette logo.
There you go.
We're talking to you. All right. Another way to go about this is number 5, which is differentiation. So in a market where the complexity is common and a simple and a unique brand needs to stand out, helping a small business to differentiate them from its competitors, it is a way to do this. And we were talking about this earlier about if using a simple square approach, then we look at your version being more circles or whatever element is going to create a unique way for you to look.
Or the square doesn't have to be just a flat color square. It can be like a window to bring in an image that pops out of it, or integrate other values and elements into that square, or make a pattern out of that square and repeat over a background. There's many different ways of how to make debranding work, especially at the scale level, because we're not as stuck to what we were. And this is huge for people, for brands, differentiating from competition that got stuck to the past and are still living there.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're finding that everyone else in your industry or your market or your segment is
not reacting,
is not reacting and is still using logos from the 90s and the noughties, then because I'm using those two because I know that distinctively that was when technology and computers got more powerful and more creative with what they were doing. So there's a lot of logos that instantly show that they were built in that period. And if you see this, that's why I'm even talking about the vignette approach that even recently happened. There's reasons for that come about. But look at differentiation as an opportunity for debranding. Well, that was pretty much where we've talked about today. So we're going to have a bit of a coffee cup moment. So grab your coffee if you haven't already and take a sip and just relax and sit back while we talk about timing. So if it's done at the right time, a debrand's effort can be hugely beneficial because one, recognition has been built over time. It can be summarized and summoned with the right retention of the key features in it due to its maturity stage. In evolving landscapes of brand identity, debranding emerges as a powerful tool to simplify and deepen the connection with the audience, giving it a more flexible and meaningful way by a way of simplification. Which is pretty much what we talked about with this, is that you can't just jump into debranding. You either start it as the first thing you do as part of your process, or you've got a mature brand and you reverse engineer it to try and work out how to get there. It's really only got a start and an ending. There's no sort of middle ground. It's like you got to use it. And as I touched on earlier, it's the foundation. It becomes the logo you default to, and you can build other elements onto it and go with, even if a trend does come in, that logo will work with it because you just adapt it or tweak it or use it in the mediums and environments it needs to be used in. So, yeah. Oh, got a bonus logo there. There we go. Sneak preview. Yeah. So look, again, it's been an exciting little journey we've just gone on here. We're talking about debranding, and it's something that we were quite passionate about because we were just noticing so many brands were doing this, and it's something we do as a default when we're working with brands. But when you're seeing big brands do it, and we have to kind of explain it to little brands, we thought, let's go here and have a chat about. And is there any closing comments you'd like to make on what we talked about today?
To highlight what you just said there at the end, it's very important to consider the debranding process as a framework, not just do a skin deep treatment of a logo or just take one or two elements willy-nilly, because these will have repercussions in your business. And like I keep repeating this, we're not very good animals of perspective. We can be introspective, but perspective of self is something that is hard. If I ask you to look at yourself, you're not going to be able to. You're going to have to ask somebody, what's on my back? Well, is there something that is on my back? Did somebody hang a sign on my back? Why is everybody laughing at me? So we need an extra pair of eyes or a team of professionals to help us with the process of debranding. From consulting all the way to implementation, there's plenty of space for a chat between us and yourselves watching this. So if you have any questions around debranding, because at first it may not be a simple, or it sounds just too abstract to consider, but it's definitely the way of the future. And those who refuse to look at the future get stuck to the past inevitably.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we have focused on the logo, but the logo is only one element of the brand and debranding process. But we've just used it because it's the easiest visual way to illustrate what we've been talking about today. So, thank you everyone for your time today. We look forward to having future conversations with you. And we've got an exciting topic we're going to talk about next week. So look out for the social posts as we talk about that. And we look forward to catching you next week as we amplify your brand. Take care, everyone. Bye.